But before we dive into the disturbing tales of the night, let me ask you, do you have the courage to stay until the end? Most viewers don't subscribe to the channel, perhaps out of oversight, or perhaps because after hearing these stories, they never slept the same way again. If you think you can handle it, click subscribe now. I've always heard that some roads hold things we can't explain. I never paid much attention until fate decided to make my family living proof of that. This story started with my father. He worked as a trucker for over 30 years. One of those tough guys who aren't afraid of anything, you know. Except one particular trip changed everything. It was a common route, a back road he knew by heart. He was exhausted, having been awake for almost 24 hours, and decided to stop for a bit. He found an old abandoned gas station on the side of the road, one of those places that seems to have been forgotten by time. He pulled the truck over there, confirmed with the company over the radio that everything was okay, and decided to sleep a few hours in the seat. But in the middle of the night, something hit the window hard. He woke up with a start, thinking it was the police or another trucker asking for help. He looked to one side, then the other. Nothing. Not a soul around. He thought he was hallucinating from sleep deprivation and opened the window a little to get some air. But that chill down his spine didn't go away. He tried to ignore it and started the truck, ready to get back on the road. That's when he turned on the headlights, he saw two figures right in front of the vehicle, a woman and a boy, standing still, covering their eyes as if the light was burning them. He turned off the headlights immediately, but what really terrified my father was the sound that came soon after, a scream that seemed to explode inside his head. It wasn't normal, it was as if it were a sound coming from inside him. He got out of the truck, looked for them around, shouted asking if they were okay, if they needed help. Nothing. The silence was absolute. The next day he told his fellow truckers. He expected to hear something like, "Ah, I've seen those two too." But no one knew anything. They had never seen a mother and son there, much less ghosts. My father had that on his mind for years, until, almost 10 years later, what was just a strange memory turned into a nightmare. On a routine trip on the same road, his truck lost its brakes. He was always very careful, but that failure happened out of nowhere. He tried everything to avoid hitting other cars, steering the truck onto the shoulder. And that's where it gets worse. The truck went off the road right at the same stretch of that abandoned gas station. In the instant he swerved, before the impact, he swears he saw, for a split second, those same two figures, the woman and the boy, in front of him. When he woke up days later, he was in the hospital. The police were there too. He had survived. But a woman and a boy died in the accident, a mother and her son, in the same spot where he had seen the ghosts years before. The report pointed to mechanical failure. No one directly blamed my father, but he was never the same. He never drove again. He never managed to sleep peacefully again. In our family, no one talks much about it, but deep down, we all know. He saw those two long before he actually met them, as if the road had marked that encounter with blood and iron, with no chance of escaping. I always wonder, was that a warning, an inevitable cycle? And worse, are there other drivers out there about to see someone who doesn't exist yet until they do? I don't know if you believe in these things, but I've never been the type to pay much attention to what I couldn't explain. I always thought a trucker's life was dangerous enough with living people on the road. But one night, that made me change my mind. It was around 1 in the morning. Me and a colleague were coming back from Querétaro, just chatting to pass the time, trying not to let sleep hit us. In the middle of the road, he nudged my shoulder and pointed forward. "Look, it's late to have people walking around here, right?" 2 women were walking on the shoulder of the road, young, probably in their early 20s. They were raising their hands, asking for a ride. Right away, my instinct was worry, not only for them, empty road, middle of the night, any maniac could show up, but also because you never know who you're picking up. I asked my colleague if we should stop. He agreed. We pulled over ahead and called the two over. I offered to take them to the next gas station or village. They smiled, looked at each other, and accepted in an almost too innocent way. They got into the truck. During the ride, I asked what they were doing there at that hour. They said they had gotten off course, ran out of money, and were trying to get to a more populated place. The conversation was light, but suddenly one of them turned to me and said she loved my perfume. She said with a strange smile that that smell was the most beautiful she had ever smelled. I had put on perfume shortly before to disguise the tiredness of the day. There was still a little left in the bottle, and I offered it to her, almost automatically. She accepted, thanked me almost childishly, almost reaching the point where they said they were getting off. The atmosphere inside the truck started to change. The screen on the dashboard lit up by itself. It kept flashing, showing some crazy graphics. It seemed like electrical interference, but different. The air became heavy. A low hum took over. They got off on a dirt road without lighting and disappeared into the darkness. We continued our journey. I thought that was it. Weird, but it passed. Only the days went by, and that strange hum didn't stop. The screen kept turning on and off by itself. Sometimes a stain, a shadow would appear that seemed to fix its gaze. And worse, every time I got into the truck, I smelled a strong smell of the same perfume I had given her. But it wasn't a normal smell anymore. It was sickening, rotten. I took the truck in for maintenance, talked to the fleet technician. He fiddled with it, opened it, tried everything. After a while, he called me over with a strange look on his face. "Man, get this truck out of here. I don't want to mess with this anymore." I asked what was wrong. He just looked at me and said it seemed dead. I left there with that pounding in my head. I called my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, people who understand these things that aren't of this world. They told me to take the truck to their house. I got there, and without thinking twice, they started to pray, throw holy water, do a smudge. And it was only then that smell disappeared. The dashboard stopped flashing. I thought it was over. Until, days later, I stopped at a gas station and told the story to two fellow truckers. They looked at each other, and one of them said, "It happened to you too, huh? These two women aren't alive. They're always there on the road, asking for a ride, and whoever stops never comes back exactly the same." Since then, I've never stopped for anyone on that highway again, and every time I smell a familiar smell in the air, I speed up. Some people have commented that they've heard of these passengers too in different parts of the country. Now I keep thinking, do they always leave something behind in the truck or inside us? I've never been one to share stories here, but this one, well, to this day my family avoids talking about it. To give some context, my twin sister, Maria do Carmo, is married to a trucker, Mario. She's used to being alone for days while he does his trips. It's always been like that, but what happened one of those nights makes me question what's real to this day. It was 2022. She had a small baby at the time, and Mario had left early for one of those long trips. At night, my sister was in that routine, put the baby to sleep, made a light dinner, and was watching a movie trying to relax. All normal. Until she heard someone messing with the front gate. She went to the window and saw clearly Mario trying to open the padlock. First, she was happy, surprised. She thought he had come back earlier than expected, but before she could go out to open it, she saw him letting go of the gate and going to the back of the lot, where the fence was lower, as if he were looking for another way to get in. That's when everything started to get strange. Mario has always been a straightforward guy, not one for surprises. And more importantly, he had the key. It didn't make sense for him to try to enter like that, surreptitiously. She was paralyzed. She said he seemed out of it, as if he were drugged or, I don't know, absent. At that moment, I swear to you, I felt a horrible tightness in my chest. Twins, right? I picked up the phone and called her. She told me right away what she was seeing and asked for help. I live relatively close, so I asked my husband to take me there. Detail: I was 6 months pregnant. When we arrived, we used our spare key and entered quickly. My sister had already locked everything and was holding the baby, as if that were the last thing that could protect her. She just said, "He's back there, in the yard." My husband went to the back window and saw there was someone standing in the middle of the yard, from the back, standing, motionless. It looked like Mario, but at the same time, it didn't look like him. It was as if it were him, but it wasn't him. The way he stood, the posture, the feeling. Something was wrong. We turned on the light, and that's when it got worse. The figure turned around, and it was Mario's face, but distorted, as if lifeless, expressionless. He didn't say anything, just turned around and ran. He jumped over the wall in an almost inhuman way and disappeared into the street, vanishing into the darkness. The worst part? While all this was happening, my sister was calling Mario. No answer. Calls and more calls. He didn't answer any. We stayed with her that night, just to make sure that thing, whatever it was, didn't come back. The next morning, we received a call. Mario had suffered an accident. One of his colleagues called to tell us. He said that around the same time that my sister saw him in the yard, he was on an isolated stretch of the road when something bizarre happened. He said he was driving normally until he noticed figures running alongside the truck. First, he thought it was paranoia, but it wasn't. The figures kept up with his speed, like children running in the woods, naked, deformed. None of them had faces. When he tried to accelerate to get out of there, another figure appeared right in front of the road. A tall, thin man dressed in black, wearing a strange hat. He was standing with his back turned, but when the truck almost hit, the man turned around. He was smiling. He swerved violently, went off the road, and lost consciousness. The truck, miraculously, was not damaged. He was found by other truckers minutes later, disoriented. At the police station, no one could explain. But when one of the colleagues picked up his phone, he saw the dozens of missed calls from my sister the night before. He called her, not even knowing how to tell her. We never managed to understand how, but something connected that apparition at my sister's house with his accident, as if they were manifestations of the same nightmare. Since then, neither of them wants to talk about the subject. Neither of them has had another similar experience, but also, no one in that house sleeps without locking each door 3 times. I just needed to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here has heard something similar.